due process of law dictates that if action is being taken against a person or their property, they should, at the very least, be served a notice. An owner of a vehicle that has now been deemed overaged should be told that their car is headed for the scrapyard. This is a key grouse that Delhi citizens are now expressing as more and more complain of their vehicles being towed away without due notice. I want to begin today's show by playing out for you this video, tweeted out by Rekha Aggarwal, a Delhi resident who has posted this video of an old vehicle being towed away without notice allegedly been given to the owner. Listen in.
गाड़ी
पहले हटा रहे थे वो अच्छा रहता।
नहीं बिल्कुल आप 2 दिन नोटिस तो दे सकते थे ना सर। आप खुद एक इंसान की तरह सोचिए, आपकी कोई चीज इस तरह से उठा के ले जाएगा गाड़ी?
ऐसे जा रही है।
नहीं जा तो रही है। नहीं अरे तो आप बता तो सकते हैं ना,
आप ले जा रहे हैं,
आप बता तो सकते हैं ना। आप मुझे
तो सब मत बोलिए, एक से बात कीजिए।
कोई एक बंदा बात कीजिए, फिर हम
आप पीछे हो जाइए, पीछे जी कोई बात नहीं।
ठीक है,
क्या अब बता
हमने आपसे ये कहा, हमें सिर्फ 2 दिन का टाइम या 1 दिन का टाइम दे दीजिए।
अब सुनिए मेरे को, हाँ ये ड्राइव चल रही है, इसके अंदर टाइम नहीं देते किसी को।
नहीं तो ये तो कोई कानून ही नहीं हुआ ना। अब उठा के हमें उठा के ले जाए कि हमने तो पेपर में छपवा दिया था और आपको ले जाएंगे उठा के।
ऐसा नहीं तो आप ही की गाड़ी नहीं उठाई, पूरी दिल्ली में गाड़ी।
नहीं देखिए, गलत चाहे सिर्फ मेरे साथ हो रहा हो या गलत सबके साथ हो रहा हो, गलत तो गलत है। मैं तो ये पूछ रहा हूँ कि किसी को आपको
अब या तो
अच्छा शांत हो जाओ जरा 2 मिनट।
Okay. So why are some vehicles being towed away without notice to owners in Delhi as claimed by them? Now, let's explain to you what's happening. This harks back to a policy introduced by the Delhi government on March 29 this year, where they deemed that all old vehicles that are plying on the roads and parked in public places will be towed away and sent for scrapping. Old vehicles have been defined as those older than 10 years in the case of diesel and 15 years for petrol. The purpose of this is to reduce pollution in Delhi and stems from orders passed by the National Green Tribunal, upheld then by the Supreme Court. Already over 53 lakh vehicles of this nature have been identified and deregistered in Delhi. By the way, 80,000 of these are government-owned vehicles by various departments. The question is, should this be towed away by force and scrapped without the knowledge of the owners, especially when there are options legally available? Mirror Now has taken up this cause. Mirror Now's managing editor Nikunj Garg is explaining why.
Let me actually explain to our viewers why are we doing this campaign. I am not doing this campaign because I have in quarrel with the Supreme Court's order, or I am doing this campaign because I have a problem personal or private or on a public forum apropos the scrappage policy. My intention of doing this campaign is very simple. This country is governed by a constitution. That constitution puts the rights of the citizens as supreme. Till as late 70s, right to property was a fundamental right in this country, enshrined in the constitution. It was changed 2 years back. Supreme Court said that right to private property is a human right. You violate it, you violate human rights. That is the Supreme Court of this country. More importantly, in any country, the way citizens are treated decides the level of maturity of that country in terms of its democratic rights, in terms of its democratic flourish, as how citizens' rights are respected. Is this the way that we are going to treat the citizens in this day and age, 21st century? When we call ourselves, our Prime Minister calls, Honorable Mr. Modi calls this country as the mother of democracy, that citizens are crying on the streets and the department is throwing away their vehicles. Who has given that right to the department? My quarrel is with the fact that the citizens' rights are being trampled over by a department which many citizens today believe, and those citizens have contacted us, written to us, has gone rogue, in cahoots. Citizens are writing this, I am not saying this, in cahoots with certain private operators. Now, you implement a policy, under the CRPC and under the law of this country, even if you are accused of murder, which is an obvious wrong and obvious right case, you are called for questioning. You cannot be arrested without questioning. Unless someone has seen you, there's a smoking gun right in your hand. Now, here is a situation where the citizen does not know the car parked outside his own house's boundary wall or even at the gate of his house is being picked up without a notice. I mean, you have deregistered vehicles. What does that mean? You obviously have the addresses of those vehicles in your databases. Why can't you deliver those notices? Why can't you give adequate time to the citizens? This entire drive, I am sorry to say, with my long experience in public reporting, covering crime, covering city, for years together, multiple chief ministers, I can tell you, smacks not only of arrogance, not only of trampling over the citizens' rights, but also of corruption.
Correct.
And that is why,
Correct.
that is why I am raising this issue on this channel, on this network, and I will continue to push for an answer from the authorities, including Mr. Gehlot, and going forward, the authorities in the central government, and ask them that what is stopping the governments from serving citizens a notice.
All right, so that is the reason that we're focusing on this very callous negation of citizens' rights. Because this is what the actual process is laid down by law. And I think I should go through it so that we can understand the context of how these rights are being flouted. So the actual process is that enforcement officers had to begin zone-wise drive seizures. If they identify such vehicles, first a memo has to be issued to the owner of that overage car that is seen plying on the road. That seizure memo of the car, if seen on the road or parked in a public space, has to be issued with due notice, and location of the car shared with the registered scrapping facility. Then after that, the registered scrapping facility takes the vehicle. The scrap value then can be collected by the owner from the scrapping facility. That scrap value is decided as per rate fixed by the Union Steel Ministry. So that's the process. There are also options given to people who may not want to scrap their car for one reason or the other. So the first option is that you can convert your overage vehicle to an electric vehicle. And there are government mandated vendors who can do this. You can, option 2, opt for voluntary vehicle scrapping through registered scrapping facility. And option 3, you can obtain an NOC to sell or ply your vehicle in another state. Has that option been given to all of these people whose vehicles have been picked up? Now, that's really the question. Shouldn't the due process of law be followed, or should it be ignored to blindly execute a government policy? Don't vehicle owners have the right to know their vehicles will be towed by the government? Where is the promised tax rebate if old vehicles are scrapped? Remember, in October of 2022, it was promised that there will be a tax rebate if you go and scrap your vehicles. Where is that incentive? And will all old government vehicles also be scrapped, or will only the Aam Aadmi be targeted? Should exceptions be made in certain cases? For example, with senior citizens. Those are some of the issues we need to address. To speak more on this, I'm joined today by Kushan Mitra, automotive journalist. Nakul Narang, he's someone who has suffered this kind of a process. He was the owner of an old vehicle and was forced to sell his car. Jayant is also joining me, someone again who has suffered, and we want to hear voices of citizens today. Rekha Aggarwal, consumer affairs lawyer, with me on the show. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us. Let me begin with Nakul Narang, because we want to understand the plight of all of this. Some of our viewers might be thinking, so what if you have an old vehicle? That's the rule. Too bad. But it's the process and the lack of notice which is the issue, isn't it?
Absolutely. So this entire 10-year and 15-year ban, which is there on the diesel cars and the petrol cars, it is not backed by any scientific research. How can the government say that a 10-year car starts polluting? Does the car really know that it has turned 10 and it has to start polluting more? If somebody has a car which meets the pollution norms, which has a legal registration certificate valid for 15 years, the person has insurance and the car is in mint condition, then how and why those cars are banned? What does the pollution under control certificate mean? It means that the vehicle complies with the existing pollution norms, right? So somebody who does not have a pollution certificate gets fined in Delhi. Somebody who has a pollution certificate, but the car is 10 years old, the car gets scrapped or it gets impounded by the police. And this discrimination is happening to the private car owners. I have seen the government vehicles being used in Delhi, and there is no such restriction on them. On top of this, if you talk about the pollution, there are various sources of pollution. Road dust is one of the main causes in Delhi NCR. There is nothing that the government is doing to control that. All the blame is passed on to the private car owners, and they are the ones who are bearing the brunt of this. The other thing is that if we talk about the global markets, there also the fitness of the vehicle is considered. Government should inspect the cars, they should certify whether they comply with the norms, and then only an action should be taken. On the roads while driving, we see that, there
What
are...
happened with you, Nakul? Tell me your story. What happened with you?
So I had a 10-year-old diesel car, which I had to forcibly sell. It was in absolute pristine condition. It was completely maintained at an authorized service center. It was flawless, but just because it had completed 10 years, I had to forcibly sell it off and spend my savings on buying a new vehicle, which was not a priority for me. I could have used that money for some other purpose, which was my priority. And when you buy a new car...
But, if I ask you that you have options under the law, we've listed those options. You could have taken an NOC, sold it or plied it in another state, converted to an electric vehicle. I want to understand that why is this policy difficult to actually implement practically? Did you know of all of these options? Were you given a notice before the scrappage took place?
So in my case, I had to sell it off. I did not wait for the scrappage to happen because I knew that if it gets scrapped, then the money that I will get will be peanuts. So whatever money I was getting, although I had to sell off the car at a huge depreciated price because of the 10-year ban. In the second-hand market also, nobody was willing to buy that car because everybody said that it has completed its life and there are no buyers in Delhi NCR. We might have to sell it off somewhere else. So that was one challenge that I faced. The second challenge is as far as conversion to electric cars is concerned. So that costs at least 5 lakh rupees, right? Why would somebody not buy a second-hand car and use it? 5 lakh rupees is not a small amount. On top of this, what about the reliability after that?
Correct.
What about the charging infrastructure? And I would also like to highlight that most of the electricity that comes to Delhi comes from the thermal power plants. They are way more polluting than a petrol or a diesel engine. And if somebody is using an...
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. And I'll come back to you on that, Nakul. But, we wanted to understand that all of these rules, are they actually practical? And you make a good point. If you have to spend an additional 5 lakhs to turn your vehicle into an EV, okay, you're going to get peanuts if you send it to the scrapyard. I don't know what happened to that tax incentive which was supposed to come in. Then why would you do that? Let me go to Jayant, another owner of a car which has been deemed as old. Jayant, what was your experience?
So my experience was similar to Nakul, and one of my relatives had a similar experience as well. So I also had a car that completed 15 years, and now I also didn't wait for the scrapping notice, and I had to sell it at the cost wasn't efficient or effective for me. So the solutions that were provided by the solution provided by the government to convert it into EV, first, not all cars have not all cars are fit for EV retrofitting. So if you go for cars like Fortune or SUVs, they are not fit for EV. The website that they have given us to call these EV retrofitters, when you call them, most of them say that we are based outside Delhi, first of all. Second, they say that we only cover very small vehicles like Wagner or Swift, and not everyone falls under the Suzuki category or any other brand category. So this was my experience with this. And the second thing, when you scrap it, once that it's depreciated and the value is not good. Another thing is that now after the COVID, we already suffered COVID setbacks, and there were pay cuts and everything. And now after this, and we are now implementing the scrappage policy, and we are being forced to sell our cars and even scrap them. So this is like very tough on us citizens to go
Okay.
to plan and buy a new car, and that's how this impacts us.
Yeah, and car prices have gone up. Kushan will know this very well. Car prices, Kushan Mitra with us, automotive journalist. Car prices have gone up in the last few years because input costs have gone up. In the last 3 years, I think there's been a significant increase in the price of a new car because all your inputs from steel, your various parts, semiconductors, everything has become more expensive. There are some estimates that 12 to 15% on average is the increase in the cost of a new vehicle. You know, this seems to be one of those policies which has started with a certain intent, but its implementation has gotten lost on the way.
Absolutely. There's no doubt. And it's very painful to hear these stories from customers, people who owned old cars. If you maintain your old car correctly, and as I wrote very recently on Sunday in my column in the print, I said a well-maintained old car, running it mildly, as long as you maintain it well, as long as you get your fitness certificates and your pollution control under control certificate, it is more friendly to the environment, even with its tailpipe emissions, whether it's Bharat Stage 4, than buying a brand new car, because a brand new car means, and cars tend to use virgin steel, that is freshly made steel. Electric cars, of course, you have lithium. I won't even get into debates of thermal power and all of that, but if you use a car lightly, whether you're a senior citizen or if you use a car lightly, it is better for the environment on the whole if you run an older car than buying a brand new car. Of course, as your first guest said, a new car is also expensive. It's a new cost for them because, when you sell your old 10-year-old diesel car, you're probably getting a lakh and a half, whereas a new car, a new SUV, whether it's petrol or diesel, of that size would cost you 15 to 20 lakhs. Costs have gone up much more than 15%. I'm just joking. I mean, it's a good thing cars are not part of the consumer price index, but they've become really expensive. And these are unnecessary costs for common citizens. Also, because of this rule, you have a depreciation, accelerated depreciation of the vehicle. Honestly, I feel it is time that the authorities and the courts, when they came up with this policy, it was a good thing. I mean, of course, vehicular pollution is easy to control. But right now, I think, with new norms, particularly Bharat State 6 norms that are there, cars are incredibly clean. And the question nobody's asked, does this 15-year rule also apply to electric cars? Are we even looking at that? So eventually, I think the courts have to look at this again. As for your contention about the way the authorities are seizing the cars, I think that's wrong. If anything has to be seized, you're supposed to be given a notice, right? I mean, you can be questioned by the courts. Yes, I know the authorities over here can be very high-handed in India. A low-level officer can, freeze a bank account because he thinks you've done something wrong. I won't accuse anybody of collusion, but, at a level, it feels like there's collusion between the guys throwing away the cars and the second-hand market or scrap dealers. You never know.
No, so I mean, one way or the other, I don't know. We don't know if there is a collusion. The fact is that if people are forced to buy a new car every 10 years, if it's diesel, and 15 years if it's petrol, it helps the automobile industry. There is no doubt about it. It helps scrap dealers. It helps the whole process. But the question is, are we certifying that the car is indeed a pollutant? I mean, there are people who collect vintage cars. And there was one such person who actually went to court, Rekha Aggarwal. I want to come to you because this was a very interesting case. The Delhi High Court actually put a stay on it because this individual went and said that, listen, this is a vintage car. And it's perfectly fine. Don't scrap it.
That was one case of its own where somebody who's having a vintage car did not want it to be scrapped, and the High Court, came to his help that yes, that car could not be scrapped because that car was not on the road, So that was not plying on a regular basis. Probably once in a while it was participating in rallies. So coming to the current problem that I heard all the other three speakers, and I fully agree with them. In fact, they said it all, that as a consumer, I have a right to have what is called value for money. So if I put in my hard-earned money and I get a car, of my choice, number one, that car has to be, working. It should be in a proper condition, and I should be getting full satisfaction for the money that I have paid. Now, whether the government, whether the Supreme Court order regarding scrapping taking these cars which are, become old cars to be off the road, whether that is correct or not, that is a totally debatable question, and until that order is set aside, we all have no choice but to comply with it. But the current problem that we are facing today is that how the cars are being towed away without even putting you to notice. And the very fundamental protection that every citizen of a country has under the Constitution of India, that is a right to be heard, besides the right to property that Nakul was talking about right in the beginning of your show. And I fully agree with that you have a right to property, and that is in fact become a human right. And you have a right to live the life according to your choice, as long as you do not infringe the fundamental rights of other people. So certainly, whether your car, is becoming a hazard, environmental hazard to others, simply because it has become an old car, it has become 15 years, more than 15 years, that is a big controversial point, which the Supreme Court may have to rethink and have a relook at that. But as far as towing away the cars are concerned, taking them off the roads without putting you to notice, the very mandate of a constitution is that you are innocent until proved guilty. So even as Nakul had given an example of a murderer, that even if a person has been, accused of murder, he cannot just be put behind bars, until there is there's a very
I want to get the counter from you.
Him.
1 minute, Rekha ji. So then let's understand, again, coming back to the context. Delhi is notorious for terrible pollution levels every year. In the season, everyone's choking.
Yes.
Now, data shows that 51% of that air pollution is contributed by vehicles. And hence, that's the context of this coming in, that old polluting vehicles should be removed from the streets of Delhi. So it seems like a noble cause. Now, how can this be implemented without infringing on the rights of citizens?
By putting them to notice. The answer is very straight and simple, that yes, if my car is in fact an environmental hazard, if it is going to infringe the fundamental rights of other human citizens, of the city, who have a right to live a peaceful life without choking their lungs, then I also have a right to enjoy my property. And therefore, before the government decides to tow away my vehicle from the road, I should be put to notice that, look, Mr. So-and-so, you are given a certain period of time. Please comply. Please give your answer within 1 week's time or 15 days' time, that whether you're willing to obtain, choose any of the options which you had just spelled out, those 3 options. Are you willing to obtain any of those options, or should we take away your car? And only if I have not answered the notice, then should my car be towed away without any further notice. So I have the right of personal hearing, that which in fact you call audi alteram partem, the rule of natural justice, the right to be heard. That cannot be denied away, even if my vehicle is an environmental hazard, even if it is a polluting vehicle.
Yeah, because that's the very, because look at, so Nakul, for example, had to get rid of his car, which he says was in pristine condition. At least he got to sell it. Imagine if it's scrapped and he is handed, a small fraction of the value, saying now, you go take this.
A small amount of money, yes.
Yeah, that's, you're just robbing him in a sense of the value of his asset. Kushan, I want to understand from your point that you made earlier, and I'd like you to elaborate on it, where you said a well-maintained vehicle that is 10 years or older could be less polluting than a, poorly maintained vehicle which might not be that old. Can you explain to us?
Of course, I mean, if you get your car serviced properly at authorized service center. If the engine is well maintained, if it's cleaned regularly, if your car drives well, you run the proper tires, it is not that polluting. You see every day, whether you're in Delhi or any other city in India, commercial vehicles that may not be that old, but are poorly maintained because the drivers are driving them very roughly. You see them belching smoke, even if they're petrol powered or even CNG powered for that matter. A well-maintained car will, if well-maintained, that is, will be less polluting. And I also want to say that if you're not running your car all that much, you're not polluting as much as a brand new car would, because you have to consider the production cost of a car. It takes a huge amount of energy to produce a car. We are not looking at the overall carbon cost of a vehicle. We're just looking at the operating carbon cost, the operating emissions. You're not looking at the emissions at the production side. You're not looking at the environmental cost of mining more iron ore, or the environmental cost of mining and processing lithium or the rare earth metals you need for motors. I'm not saying if you must buy a new car, sometimes you might need to buy a new car because, yes, modern cars are far safer than older cars. And, sometimes you have run your car out. It is old, it feels old, and you might want to buy a new car. If you have to buy a new car, buy an electric car, no doubt. If you must buy a new car. But if you're a senior citizen and you're going out...
Who's going to pay for it, Kushan? We're talking about this as if it's so accessible to everyone. Who's going to pay for an electric car, which even today, let's be honest, costs much more? It costs much more. So, we are a country that recycles everything. I mean, घर के पुराने कपड़े नहीं फेंके जाते. We keep using those in different ways. And you are enforcing this without taking into consideration the requirement of that family or that individual in a city which might not have enough options of public transport.
True, absolutely. There's no doubt about that. And I want to bring in the point of, say you're a senior citizen, right? I mean, you don't have a source of income and you might have a very, very well-maintained car. You might be just going from your house to the club every day, the 2 or 3 kilometers. You're not running a car for hundreds of kilometers a week. You could have it's very unfair to ask somebody who's in retirement to buy a new car because it's past 15 years old. Most senior citizens I know do maintain their cars very, very well. There has to be a relook at this. There's also, you have to also appreciate the one point that the vehicle fitness and the pollution under certificate system is slightly broken. Again, I don't want to say there's corruption, but we know that you can get a certificate very easily. Now, there was also talk last year by the Ministry of Road Transportation and Highways that they will allow older cars to operate beyond 15 years as long as they got a certain certificate. But there has been unnecessary delay over here. I mean, I don't see people having a problem if they're asked to pay 5,000 or 10,000 rupees to operate an older car. It's still a lot cheaper than having to buy a new car or getting no value for an old car. And I have no reason why this implementation of this has been delayed by the government.
The PUC point is important. The PUC point is important because what's the point of that PUC if it is not being trusted, and if an older vehicle also passes that certification which says that pollution is under check, then why not? Nakul, what would you like to see change, and what would you answer to those who today will ask you that, Nakul, maybe you thought you maintained your car well, but as per the rules, it was 10 years and it was diesel and it was polluting?
First thing is, when a new car is sold, the government issues a registration certificate. If that is valid for 15 years, the government's commitment has to be there for 15 years. They cannot change their mind during those 15 years and suddenly come up with new norms. About, I think, 6 years back, they were promoting hybrid cars. There were subsidies on hybrid cars and Maruti had entered the market with diesel hybrid cars. The same vehicles now have the 10-year limit. During the BS4 diesel ban, which happened towards the end of last year and early this year, cars as new as 2020 diesel models were banned from flying for a few days in Delhi. And the reason was high AQI. Now, the point is that if there is no improvement in AQI despite banning 10-year-old cars or 15-year-old cars, if you don't see any change happening in the pollution levels, then why are we scrapping the cars? The other thing is the government is till date collecting tax for 15 years on new diesel cars. If the life is 10, how can they collect tax for 15 years? They should collect tax for 10 years and maybe at 8 years or 9 years or 10 years, if they are giving extension of another 5 years or 10 years, they can again collect tax from us, right? So the government has to start inspecting the cars. This blanket ban is absolutely not fair. They have to check the fitness of the car. You look at the tractors, you look at the road rollers, you look at JCBs, cranes. There are so many commercial vehicles that ply on the road. Most of them don't even have registrations. They don't pay any taxes. They don't get service on time. And still they continue plying on the roads.
Okay.
Who's catching them? Nobody.
The implementation has to be, sensible at the end of the day. You can't blindly follow something without application of mind and definitely not without due process. This is a policy that should be re-looked at. We're going to be continuing this campaign on Mirror Now, but for today I want to thank all of you for joining us on the show as we start this campaign. I want to turn to a breaking story that's